No Bad Parts: Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model. Written by Richard C. Schwartz, Ph.D., read by Sen Naomi Kirst-Schultz. We are on Chapter 1, Part 2. We are all multiple. Another theme we will be exploring in this book is how it's all parallel. How we relate in the inner world will be how we relate in the outer. If we can appreciate and have compassion for our parts, even for the ones we've considered to be enemies, we can do the same for people who resemble them. On the other hand, if we hate or disdain our parts, we'll do the same with anyone who reminds us of them. Some discoveries I made about parts. Even the most destructive parts have protective intentions. Parts are often frozen in past traumas when their extreme roles were needed. When they trust it's safe to step out of their roles, they are highly valuable to the system. Burdens. Here's another key discovery I stumbled on. Parts carry extreme beliefs and emotions in or on their quote-unquote bodies that drive the way they feel and act. The idea that parts have bodies that are separate and different from the person's body they are connected to may seem strange or preposterous at first. Let me interject here that I am simply reporting what I've learned over years of exploring this inner territory without judgment regarding the ontological reality of that data. If you ask your parts about their own bodies, I predict you'll get the same answers I'm covering here. For a long time, I didn't know what to make of this discovery. Regardless, this is how parts describe themselves, that they have bodies and that their bodies contain emotions and beliefs that came into them and don't belong to them. Often they can tell you the exact traumatic moment these emotions and beliefs came into or attached to them, and they can tell you where they carry what seems to them to be these foreign objects in or on their bodies. Quote, "It's this tar on my arms," unquote. Or, quote, "a fireball in my gut," unquote. Or, quote, "a huge weight on my shoulders," unquote. For example. These foreign feelings or beliefs, sometimes described as energies, are what I call burdens. It turns out that burdens are powerful organizers of a part's experience and activity, almost in the same way that a virus organizes a computer. It's important to note here that these burdens are the product of a person's direct experience, the sense of worthlessness that comes into a child when a parent abuses them, the terror that attaches to parts during a car accident, the belief that no one can be trusted that enters young parts when we are betrayed or abandoned as children. When we are young, we have little discernment regarding the validity of these emotions and beliefs, and, consequently, they get lodged in the bodies of our young parts and become powerful, albeit unconscious, organizers of our lives thereafter. These we call personal burdens. Some of the most powerful personal burdens are similar to what attachment theory pioneer John Bowlby called internal working models. He saw them as maps you developed as a child of what to expect from your caretaker and the world in general, and then from subsequent close relationships. They also tell you things about your own level of goodness and how much you deserve love and support. There is another class of burdens that are called legacy burdens because they did not come from your direct life experience. Instead, you inherited them from your parents who got them from their parents and so on. Or you absorbed them from your ethnic group or from the culture you currently live in. Legacy burdens can be equally, if not more, potent organizers of our lives, and because we've had them so long, we marinate in them, so it's often harder to notice them than the personal burdens we took on from traumas. In this way, legacy burdens can be as prominent and unnoticed as water to a fish. Parts are not their burdens. This distinction between parts and the burdens they carry is crucial because many of the world's problems are related to the error that most paradigms for understanding the mind make, to mistake the burden for the part that carries it. It's common to believe that a person who gets high all the time is an addict who has an irresistible urge to use drugs. That belief leads to combating that person's urge with opioid antagonists, with recovery programs that can have the effect of polarizing the addictive part, or with the willpower of the addict. If, on the other hand, you believe that the part that seeks drugs is protective and carries the burden of responsibility for keeping this person from severe emotional pain or even suicide, then you would treat the person very differently. You could instead help them get to know that part and honor it for its attempts to keep them going, and negotiate permission to heal or change what it protects. Then you would help the person heal by returning to the now liberated, quote-unquote, addict part and helping it unburden all of its fear and responsibility. Unburdening is another aspect of IFS that seems spiritual because as soon as the burden leaves parts' bodies, parts immediately transform into their original, valuable states. It's as if a curse was lifted from an inner sleeping beauty, or ogre, or addict. The newly unburdened part almost universally says it feels much lighter and wants to play or rest, after which it finds a new role. The former addict part now wants to help you connect with people. The hypervigilant part becomes an advisor on boundaries. The critic becomes an inner cheerleader, and so on. In other words, it's as if each part is like a person with a true purpose. No bad parts. If the title of the book didn't trigger this question for you, I'll ask it directly now. What are we to do with parts that have committed terrible violence? What about those that have murdered or sexually abused people? Or parts that are determined to kill their person? How in the world can these be good parts in bad roles? As I did IFS with clients, it became increasingly clear that the burdens that drove their parts were rooted in early traumas. So in the late 1980s and early 1990s, I came to specialize in the treatment of those who had suffered complex trauma and carried serious diagnoses like borderline personality disorder, chronic depression, and eating disorders. I also became interested in understanding and treating perpetrators of abuse, because it became clear that healing one of them could potentially save many future victims in turn. For 7 years, I consulted to Onarga Academy, a treatment center in Illinois for sex offenders. I had the opportunity to help those clients listen to the parts of them that had molested children, and over I heard the same story. While the offender was being abused as a child, one of their protector parts became desperate to protect them, and took on the rageful or sexually violent energy of their perpetrator and used that energy to protect themselves from that abuser. From that point on, however, this protector part continued to carry that burden of the perpetrator's hatred and desire to dominate and punish vulnerability. The part also was frozen in time during the abuse. Thus, the kick in molesting a child came from being able to hurt and have power over someone weak and innocent. These perpetrator parts would do the same thing in their psyches to their own vulnerable childlike parts. This process in which protectors in one generation take on the perpetrator burdens of their parents while they were being abused by those parents is one way that legacy burdens are transferred. As we healed their parts, stuck in early abuse, their perpetrator parts unloaded their parents' violent or sexual energies, and like other parts, quickly transformed and took on valuable roles. During this period, I had the opportunity to work with other kinds of perpetrators, including murderers, with similar findings. I remembered that famous Will Rogers saying, "I never met a man I didn't like." And I realized I could say that about parts. I ultimately liked all of them, even the ones that had done heinous things. Now, decades later, I've worked with countless clients, as have other IFS therapists around the world, and I believe it is safe to say that there are no bad parts. Spiritual traditions encourage us to have compassion for everyone. This aspect of IFS actually helps make that possible. IFS operates from the radically different assumption that each part, no matter how demonic seeming, has a secret, painful history to share of how it was forced into its role and came to carry burdens it doesn't like that continue to drive it. This also implies clear steps for helping these parts and the people they are in to heal and change. It brings hope to the hopeless. The self. In those early days of helping my clients listen to and form better relationships with their parts, I tried out a technique from Gestalt therapy involving multiple chairs. Basically, a client sits in one chair and talks to an empty chair across from them. And for IFS, I had them imagine that the part they were talking to was in that empty chair. And because the parts got to speak too, there was a lot of hopping back and forth. And to make it all work, I ended up with an office full of chairs. I watched clients shift around the room, being their different parts, and it actually helped me to learn a lot about the patterns among the parts. Then, one insightful client suggested that moving from chair to chair might be unnecessary and that they could do the same work just by sitting in one seat. That method went fine for that particular client, and when I tried it out with others, they found they could do it that way too. My main goal was to help my clients form better relationships with their parts. Some of the patterns I kept seeing with individuals were similar to what I witnessed as a family therapist. For example, a bulimic kid would be speaking with their critical part, and all of a sudden they'd become angry at the critic and yell at it. In family therapy, let's say this client is a girl talking to her critical mother and she gets mad and shouts at her mother. In such cases, we're taught to look around the room and see if anyone is covertly siding with the girl against the mother. For example, the girl's father is signaling to her that he disagrees with the mother too. This is when I'd ask the father to step back out of the girl's line of vision. She'd slowly calm down and things would go better with her conversation with her mother. So I started using this quote-unquote step-back technique with individuals. I'd have them ask other parts to step aside so that pairs of parts could really dig in and listen to each other. For example, I might say, could you find the one who's angry at the target part, in this case, the critic, and just ask it to step back for a little while? To my amazement, most clients said, okay, it did, without much hesitation, and when the part was off to the side like that, my clients would shift into an entirely different state, and then other parts would step in. A fearful part, for example, and the more of them that stepped back to allow the client to speak, the more mindful and curious the client would become. The simple act of getting these other parts to open more space inside seemed to release someone who had curiosity, but who was also calm and confident relative to the critic. When my clients were in that place, the dialogue would go well. The critic would drop its guard and tell its secret history, and the client would have compassion for it, and we would learn about what it protected and so on. Client after client, the same mindfully curious, calm, confident, and often even compassionate part would pop up out of the blue, and that part seemed to know how to relate internally in a healing way. And when they were in that state, I'd ask clients, now, what part of you is that? And they'd say, that's not a part like these others, that's more myself, or that's more my core, or that's who I really am. That's the part that I call the self. And after thousands of hours doing this work, I can say with certainty that the self is in everybody. Furthermore, the self cannot be damaged. The self doesn't have to develop, and the self possesses its own wisdom about how to heal internal as well as external relationships. For me, this is the most significant discovery that I stumbled onto. This is what changes everything. The self is just beneath the surface of our protective parts, such that when they open space for it, it comes forward spontaneously, often quite suddenly and universally. Your turn. So, that's my introduction to IFS. It makes a certain amount of conceptual sense to many people initially, but until you've actually experienced it, it's hard to fully get what I'm talking about. So now it's your turn. I'm going to invite you to try an exercise designed to give you a start on getting to know yourself in this different way. Exercise. Getting to know a protector. Take a second and get comfortable. Set up like you would if you were going to meditate. If it helps you to take deep breaths, then do that. Now, I invite you to do a scan of your body and your mind, noting in particular any thoughts, emotions, sensations, or impulses that stand out. So far, it's not unlike mindfulness practice, where you're just noticing what's there and separating from it a little bit. As you do that, see if one of those emotions, thoughts, sensations, or impulses is calling to you, seems to want your attention. If so, then try to focus on it exclusively for a minute, and see if you can notice where it seems to be located in your body or around your body. As you notice it, notice how you feel toward it. By that, I mean, do you dislike it? Does it annoy you? Are you afraid of it? Do you want to get rid of it? Do you depend on it? So we're just noticing that you have a relationship with this thought, this emotion, sensation, or impulse. If you feel anything besides a kind of openness or a curiosity towards it, then ask the parts of you that might not like it or are afraid of it or have any other extreme feeling about it to just relax inside and give you a little space to get to know it without an attitude. If you can't get to that curious place, that's okay. You could spend the time talking to the parts of you that don't want to relax about their fears about letting you actually interact with the target emotion, thought, sensation, or impulse. But if you can get into that mindfully curious place relative to the target, then it is safe to begin to interact with it. That might feel a bit odd to you at this point, but just give it a try, and by that I mean, as you focus on this emotion or impulse or thought or sensation, and you notice it in this place in your body, ask it if there's something it wants you to know, and then wait for an answer. Don't think of the answer, so any thinking parts can relax too. Just wait silently with your focus on that place in your body until an answer comes, and if nothing comes, that's okay too. If you get an answer, then as a follow-up, you can ask what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do this inside of you. What's it afraid would happen if it didn't do what it does? And if it answers that question, then you probably learned something about how it's trying to protect you. If that's true, then see if it's possible to extend some appreciation to it for at least trying to keep you safe, and see how it reacts to your appreciation. Then ask this part of you what it needs from you in the future. When the time feels right, shift your focus back to the outside world and notice more of your surroundings, but also thank your parts for whatever they allowed you to do, and let them know that this isn't their last chance to have a conversation with you, because you plan to get to know them even more. I hope you were able to follow me in that journey and that you got some information. Sometimes what you learn can be quite surprising, and for me, these emotions, sensations, thoughts, impulses, and other things are emanations from parts. They are what we call trailheads. This is because when you focus on one, it's as if you are starting out on a trail that will lead you to the part from which that thought, emotion, impulse, or sensation emanates. And as you get to know that part, you will learn that it isn't just that thought, sensation, impulse, or emotion. Indeed, it will let you know that it has a whole range of feelings and thoughts, and it can tell you about the role it is in, and why it does what it does. Then it will feel seen by you and you can honor it. That's what I started to do with my clients in the early 1980s, and an entirely new world opened up in the process of doing that. It reminded me of high school biology class when we looked in the microscope at a drop of pond water, and were shocked to see all kinds of little paramecia, protozoa, and amoebas scurrying around in it. When we simply turn our attention inside, we find that what we thought were random thoughts and emotions comprise a buzzing inner community that has been interacting behind the scenes throughout our lives. In this exercise, you may have noticed that by simply focusing on one of your parts, you were separating or unblending from it. In other words, suddenly there was a you who was observing and an it that was being observed. As I said in the introduction, you'll find this type of separation in mindfulness practices, and it's a great first step. Then you took the next step when you explored how you feel about it and noticed what other parts feel about it. When you feel angry or afraid of it, that wouldn't be the self, but other parts that are still blended with the self. If you were able to get those parts to step back and open space, it's likely you felt a shift into more mindfulness. From my point of view, your self was being accessed through that unblending. The simple act of getting other parts to open space brings the self forward, and a lot of meditation works by simply getting you to that more spacious, emptier mind and enabling you to feel the sense of calm well-being that fills that space. But instead of simply observing what most traditions think of as the ego, or as mere ephemeral thoughts and emotions, in this process, you turn toward what you're observing and begin a new relationship with it, one that involves a lot of curiosity. Ideally, you can continue to deepen the relationship, and parts really appreciate it when you do that. Usually, they've been operating by themselves in there without any adult supervision, and most of them are pretty young. When you finally turn around and give them some attention, it's like you're a parent who's been somewhat neglectful, but who's finally becoming more nurturing and interested in your children. Exercise. Mapping your parts. Now I'm going to invite you to get to know a cluster of parts that have relationships with each other. To do that, you'll need a pad of paper and a pencil or pen. Again, focus inside and think of another part, not the one you just worked with, but a different one that you'd like to start with this time. The trailhead could be any emotion, thought, belief, impulse, or sensation. As you focus on this new part, find it in your body or on your body. And now just stay focused on it until you get enough of a sense of it that you could represent it on the page in front of you. It doesn't have to be high art, any kind of image is good. It could even be a scribble. Just find a way to represent that part of you on a blank page. Stay focused on the part until you know how to represent it, and then draw it. After you've put that first part on the page, focus again on that same one in the same place in your body and just stay focused on it until you notice some kind of a shift and another trailhead, another part emerges. And when that happens, focus on that second one. Find it in your body and stay with it until you can represent it on the page also. After you've drawn that second one, go back to it again and stay with it until you notice yet another shift and another trailhead emerges. And then shift your focus to this new one. Find it in your body and stay with it until you can represent it on the page. And then, once again, we'll go back to that third one. Focus on it in that place in your body and just stay present to that one until still another one comes forward. And then shift to that one. Find it in your body and stay with it until you can represent it. You can repeat this process until you have a sense that you have mapped out one complete system inside you. When you feel you've done that, shift your focus back outside to your surroundings. it's likely that what you found is one clove of the garlic, as we call it in IFS. You might be familiar with the onion analogy used in psychotherapy. You peel your layers off and you get to this core, and then you heal that and you're done. Well, in IFS, it's more like a garlic bulb. You have all these different cloves, each of which has a handful of different parts inside that are related to each other and maybe are all stuck in one place in the past. As you work with one clove, you'll feel relief from the burdens it contained, but you may not have touched other cloves that revolved around other traumas. So this mapping exercise is designed to bring forth one of your cloves, one subsystem within you. Feel free to continue and map out other cloves. Now I'd like you to hold your page a little bit away from you, so extend your arms with your pad of paper all the way out and look at these 4 or 5 parts you've represented with a little perspective. How do the parts relate to each other? Do some protect others? Do some fight with each other? Is there some kind of alliance in there? As you start to form some answers, make a note on your drawing to represent them. Now, I want you to look at the parts again and explore how you feel toward each of them. When you're done with that, think about what this system needs from you. Finally, take a second to focus inside again and just thank these parts for revealing themselves to you and let them know again that this isn't the last time you'll be talking to them. Then, shift your focus back outside again. I recommend this exercise for many contexts. For example, if you have a pressing issue in your life, go inside and map it out, and some of the answers will come to you, either about what decision to make or about what parts are making it so difficult. Mapping your parts is another way to separate from them as well, because often we are quite blended with more than one. This has been No Bad Parts, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model, written by Richard C. Schwartz, Ph.D., read by Sen Naomi Kirst-Schultz. This was part 2 of chapter 1, We Are All Multiple.